She sat on the floor with her small hands covering her face, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Please don't hurt me." The living room was filled with silence, the kind that made the ticking of the clock sound louder than it should. Her cries were soft, yet they carried the kind of weight that could break anyone's heart. At that very moment, the heavy sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence, and within seconds, the front door slammed open. Her father, a man known everywhere for his wealth and authority, stepped inside with a voice that thundered across the house. "What is going on here?" Emily's body froze. She was only 9, and yet her eyes carried more fear than innocence. She turned her head slowly, her tear-streaked cheeks glowing under the pale light. The moment her father's sharp tone filled the room, her breath caught in her throat. Her father, Richard, tossed his coat onto the sofa and narrowed his eyes at the sight of his daughter on the floor. His voice was sharp, but hidden beneath it was a deep concern he couldn't mask. "Emily, why are you crying like this?" Emily's lips trembled as she tried to form words, but her silence only fueled her father's rising frustration. He stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing on the wooden floor. "Emily, answer me!" Her tiny voice finally broke through the quiet. "I was scared, Daddy. I was scared you wouldn't come home." Richard stopped in his tracks. For a man who signed million-dollar contracts every week, nothing had ever shaken him more than those words. He stared at his daughter, and for the first time in years, he noticed how fragile she truly was. His tone softened, but the intensity of his gaze remained. "Scared of what, Emily? Who made you feel this way?" Emily looked down at her trembling hands, clutching the sleeve of her small sweater. Her words cracked as she spoke. "Sometimes, when you're not here, everything feels so heavy. I don't know what to do." Richard clenched his fists, not out of anger at her, but at himself. He had been so consumed by building an empire that he had forgotten the quiet moments his daughter needed the most. The millions he had earned couldn't wipe away the tears streaming down her face, but before he could speak again, Emily's sudden whisper cut through the air. "You don't know how lonely it gets, Daddy." His breath caught. Those words dug deeper than any insult he had ever received in the business world. He took a step closer, kneeling down to meet her at eye level. His voice, though softer now, carried the same command that once made entire boardrooms go silent. "Emily, look at me. Tell me everything." Richard stayed kneeling on the wooden floor, his hands resting on his knees, but his eyes were fixed on his daughter, as though he was seeing her for the very first time. Emily's small frame shook with each sob, and the way she avoided his eyes tore something inside him. He wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but some invisible wall stopped him. Maybe it was his pride, maybe his guilt, or maybe the fear of hearing something he wasn't ready to face. He tried again, his voice firmer this time, but with a desperate softness hiding beneath. "Emily, sweetheart, I need you to talk to me. What's making you cry like this? Did someone hurt you? Did someone say something to you?" His tone almost begged her to give him clarity. Emily sniffled, wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve, and shook her head slowly. "Nobody said anything. Nobody touched me. It's just..." Her voice trailed off, and her lips pressed together as if she was fighting a battle within herself, whether to keep it hidden or to let it spill. Richard's heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. He was a man used to controlling board meetings, signing deals that shook industries, and handling crisis calls at 3 in the morning. Yet here, with his daughter, he felt powerless. "Just what, Emily? You have to tell me, baby." Finally, her eyes lifted, and the depth of sadness in them struck him like lightning. "You're never here, Daddy. You're always gone. You say you'll come for dinner, but then the phone rings, and you're out the door again. You promised me last week you'd come to my school play, but I waited, and you never came. Everyone else's parents were there, but my seat was empty. Do you know how that feels?" Richard's chest tightened. He remembered that evening vaguely. He'd been stuck in a late meeting with investors, convincing them to back his new venture. He remembered looking at the clock and thinking he still had time, but by the time he was free, the play was long over. He had brushed it off then, convincing himself Emily was too young to notice. But she had noticed. She had noticed everything. He reached out, but Emily pulled back slightly, not out of anger, but out of hurt. That small movement broke him more than any harsh word could. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it hurt you like that." She shook her head, her voice trembling again. "You didn't know because you never asked me how I feel. You come home tired, you eat, you go to your room, and sometimes you don't even kiss me goodnight anymore. You think giving me toys and dresses is enough, but I don't care about that. I just want you." The words hit Richard harder than any boardroom failure ever had. He swallowed, his throat dry. But before he could respond, Emily added something that made his heart pound louder. "Sometimes I sit by the window and watch the driveway, waiting for your car. Hours go by, and when you don't come, I cry myself to sleep." For a moment, Richard couldn't breathe. He leaned back slightly, staring at the floor as the weight of his daughter's words pressed down on him. All the late nights, the endless trips, the business dinners, it had cost him something he hadn't realized. His daughter's trust. He finally managed to whisper, "I thought I was giving you everything by building this life for us. I thought the money, the house, the comfort, I thought it was enough, but I see now it wasn't what you needed." Emily looked at him, her tears slowing, though her face was still wet. "I don't care if we live in a small house, Daddy. I don't care if you don't buy me new things. I just want to eat dinner with you, to see you clap for me when I'm on stage, to hear you tell me you're proud." Richard closed his eyes. Her words echoed the voice of someone else, his late wife, Emily's mother. Years ago, she had said almost the same thing. "Richard, money won't raise a child's heart. Your presence will." He had nodded back then, promising to do better. But promises had faded into deadlines, and deadlines into excuses. And now, here he was, facing the mirror of his failures through his daughter's tears. A long silence filled the room, broken only by the muffled sound of cars passing outside. Then Emily whispered again, almost to herself, "Sometimes I feel like I don't matter to you anymore." Those words stabbed him deeper than any insult ever could. He reached forward quickly this time, gently holding her small hands in his. "Don't you ever think that, Emily. Don't you dare believe that for a second. You matter more to me than anything. I lost sight of what was important." Emily looked at him, her big eyes searching his face for truth. "Then why don't you show me, Daddy? Why don't you stay?" Before Richard could answer, the house phone rang loudly, slicing through the tender moment. His body tensed out of habit. Every call could mean a deal, a crisis, something demanding his attention. He turned his head toward the sound, and Emily noticed it immediately. Her voice rose with sudden desperation. "See? Even now you'll run to the phone before you listen to me." Richard froze. The ring continued, echoing through the empty hallways of their mansion. But he stayed kneeling in front of Emily. He didn't move. Instead, he whispered, "Not this time." And for the first time, he let the phone ring unanswered. Emily's lips parted slightly, surprised. She hadn't expected him to ignore it. Slowly, she leaned forward, resting her head against his chest. Richard wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. But just as the warmth of the moment began to settle, a knock came at the front door, firm, loud, and unexpected. Richard's brows furrowed, and Emily lifted her head, her tears momentarily forgotten. He stood up slowly, his protective instincts rising. When he opened the door, a woman stood there, holding a small folder in her hands. She looked directly at Richard and said in a steady tone, "Mr. Walker, I think it's time we talk about Emily's future." Richard's eyes narrowed, his heart dropping into his stomach. "Who are you? And why are you here about my daughter?" The woman hesitated for a moment before replying, "My name is Sarah. I work with Child Welfare Services. Someone has reported that Emily has been emotionally neglected. We need to discuss this." Emily's eyes widened, and she clutched her father's arm tightly. Richard's chest tightened with both fear and anger. He glanced down at his daughter, then back at the woman. His empire, his reputation, and most of all his bond with Emily, all of it now stood on shaky ground. And for the first time in his life, Richard Walker, the millionaire who had conquered industries, realized he was fighting for something far more important than business: his daughter's love and trust. Richard's hand gripped the edge of the door tightly, his knuckles turning pale. The words of the woman standing in front of him echoed in his mind like thunder: Child Welfare Services. He had spent his entire life protecting his empire from rivals, lawyers, and greedy investors. But this was different. This wasn't about money, contracts, or lawsuits. This was about his daughter, and suddenly he felt stripped of all the power he thought he had. Emily pressed closer to his side, her small fingers clutching his shirt as though he might vanish if she let go. Her wide, fearful eyes shifted between her father and the stranger at the door. Richard could feel her trembling, and it made his heart pound harder. He cleared his throat, his voice sharp but wavering beneath the surface. "Who reported this? Who dares to question how I care for my daughter?" The woman didn't flinch. She had clearly dealt with powerful men before. Her calmness unsettled him even more. "Mr. Walker, I can't disclose who made the report, but I can assure you our concern is always the well-being of the child. Emily deserves to feel safe, loved, and heard. That's why I'm here." Emily tugged at his sleeve, whispering so only he could hear, "Daddy, I don't want to go anywhere, please." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Richard felt something burn behind his eyes. He gently placed his hand over hers, squeezing it reassuringly. He straightened his shoulders and looked back at the woman. "My daughter is safe. She's loved. Yes, I've made mistakes, but no one has the right to take her away from me." The woman sighed, her expression softening for just a moment. "Mr. Walker, I'm not here to take her away tonight. I just need to understand her situation better. Emotional neglect is still neglect. And if a child feels abandoned, that can leave scars deeper than anyone realizes." Richard's chest tightened again. He wanted to argue, to push her away, to slam the door shut. But Emily's trembling hand reminded him of the truth. He had neglected her in ways he never admitted. She had confessed it herself just minutes earlier. He couldn't deny it anymore. Still, he said firmly, "If you want answers, you'll hear them from me. You will not scare my daughter." The woman nodded slowly. "Then perhaps we should talk privately." Emily clung to his arm tighter. "No, Daddy, don't leave me alone with her." Richard crouched down, cupping Emily's face gently. His voice softened, trembling in a way that surprised even him. "I'm not leaving you, Emily, I promise. I'll be right here." The woman stepped inside, setting the folder on the table. The sound of the pages against the wood felt louder than it should have. She opened it, revealing documents filled with typed notes. "We've received reports that Emily has been spending long hours alone, often feeling ignored. Teachers at her school noticed changes in her behavior: withdrawal, sadness, distraction. When asked, she said she missed her father." Emily's cheeks flushed red and her eyes fell to the floor. Richard looked at her in shock. "Emily, you told them that?" Her lips trembled as she nodded. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I couldn't hold it in anymore." His heart sank. All those times he thought she was fine. All those nights he assumed she was asleep when he came home late. She had been carrying this pain alone, and he hadn't seen it. The woman closed the folder slowly. "Mr. Walker, I need to schedule follow-ups. Emily needs stability. If things don't improve, the court may step in. Richard felt a wave of panic wash over him. Court. Intervention. The thought of losing Emily, even partially, was unbearable. He leaned forward, his voice breaking for the first time in years. I'll do anything. Just don't take her from me, please. Emily gasped softly. She had never heard her father beg before, not to anyone. Seeing him plead made her realize just how much he truly cared, even if he had shown it poorly. The woman studied him, then closed her folder with a snap. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Walker. You say you'll do anything, then prove it. Show Emily she is more important than your meetings, your contracts, your wealth. Otherwise, my next visit will not be this gentle. Richard swallowed hard, his pride fighting against his love. But love finally won. You'll see. I'll show her. She is my world. After the woman left, the silence inside the mansion felt heavier than ever. Emily sat on the sofa, her small hands folded in her lap. Richard paced the room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Finally, Emily whispered, "Daddy, are they going to take me away?" He stopped instantly, turning toward her. His eyes softened, and he walked over, kneeling in front of her once more. "No, Emily, I won't let that happen. But..." He paused, lowering his gaze. "I have to admit something. I failed you. I was chasing success, thinking I was giving you everything, but I left you lonely, and I can't take those moments back. But from today, I promise, I will change." Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. "But what if it's just another promise you forget?" That question hit him like a blade. She didn't believe him, not fully, and she had every right not to. He took her hands in his and spoke firmly. "Then I'll make sure this time my actions prove it. No more empty promises." For the next hour, Richard sat with Emily, listening to her, asking about her school, her friends, her little hobbies he had never bothered to notice before. Emily hesitated at first, but slowly, her words flowed. She told him about a drawing competition she had won, but never showed him the certificate because he was away. She told him about the time she wanted him to help with homework, but gave up waiting. Each word pierced him deeper, but he listened. Yet, just as he began to feel the faintest sense of repair, Emily asked something unexpected. "Daddy, is it true you shouted at Mommy before she got sick?" Richard's blood ran cold. His face went pale. He hadn't expected this. "Who told you that?" Emily looked down. "Aunt Claire. She said you were always arguing with Mommy, and that made her sad. And then she got sick." Richard staggered back, his hands trembling. Memories of heated arguments with his late wife flooded back. He had loved her deeply, but their marriage had been strained by his endless work obsession. He remembered her tears, her voice begging him to slow down, to spend more time with family. And now Emily knew pieces of that truth. His voice cracked. "Emily, I did make mistakes with your mom. But her sickness wasn't because of me. She loved you more than anything, and she would never want you to think she left because of us." Emily's lips quivered, her tears falling again. "But sometimes I feel like everyone leaves me, Daddy. Mommy left, and you leave every day." Richard's chest felt like it was collapsing. He reached out, holding her tightly, whispering into her hair. "Not anymore. You're all I have, Emily. I can't lose you too." As the night grew darker, Richard found himself making silent promises in his heart, promises he had to keep, no matter the cost. But somewhere deep inside, a new fear grew. If Emily already doubted him, if the child welfare woman returned and found no change, he could lose her. And if he lost her, no amount of wealth could ever replace what was taken. And so, as Emily finally drifted off to sleep in his arms, Richard stared into the darkness, wondering if he was strong enough to fight his old habits, his pride, and the system that now watched him closely. For the first time, the millionaire felt powerless, not against the world, but against the possibility of losing the only person who truly mattered. The next morning, Richard woke earlier than usual. Normally, his alarm was set for business calls or early meetings, but today it was Emily's faint stirring in the next room that pulled him out of bed. He stood quietly in the hallway, watching through the slightly open door as his daughter rubbed her sleepy eyes, her hair tangled from the restless night. There was a heaviness in her movements, the kind of tiredness that didn't come from sleep, but from carrying too much weight for such a young heart. Richard felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had money enough to buy anything, yet he couldn't buy back the innocence his daughter had lost. Slowly, he pushed the door open. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said softly. Emily glanced at him, her expression guarded, not like the enthusiastic child who once ran into his arms. She simply nodded. "Morning." The single word cut through him like a knife. He wanted her warmth back, but he knew trust couldn't be rebuilt in one night. He walked closer, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I was thinking," he began carefully, "maybe today I'll drop you off at school myself and pick you up after. How would you feel about that?" Her eyes flickered with surprise, but she quickly looked down. "You don't have to. You're busy." Richard shook his head. "I'm not too busy for you anymore." His voice trembled slightly, but he meant every word. Emily's lips parted as though she wanted to believe him, but the years of disappointment still lingered in her heart. She shrugged instead, pulling her blanket closer. Later, as Richard drove her to school in his sleek black car, Emily sat quietly, gazing out the window. She didn't chatter or sing along with the radio the way she once used to. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. Richard gripped the steering wheel tighter, realizing just how much he had broken without even noticing. When they arrived at school, he leaned down to kiss her forehead before she stepped out. She hesitated, but didn't pull away this time. That tiny acceptance gave him a sliver of hope. As he watched her walk into the building, Richard felt his phone buzz in his pocket. Old habits told him to answer immediately, but he resisted. He knew that one answered call could undo the fragile progress he had just made. With a deep breath, he powered the phone off entirely. For the first time in years, he let the world wait. But as he sat there in silence, staring at the school entrance, a memory flooded his mind. His late wife, Grace. He remembered the way she once stood in that very spot, waving goodbye to Emily during kindergarten. Grace had begged him to join her on those mornings, but he had always been too busy. Now she was gone, and he was left with only the echo of her voice. "Richard, don't miss the moments that matter. One day, they'll be gone." The weight of her words crushed him. He clenched the steering wheel, whispering under his breath, "I won't fail again, Grace. Not with Emily." Hours later, when Richard returned to pick Emily up, he saw her standing by the gate. She looked smaller than ever, holding her backpack straps tightly. Other children ran into the arms of their waiting parents, laughter filling the air. Emily stood still, her eyes scanning the crowd anxiously. When she finally spotted Richard's car, her shoulders loosened just a little. She climbed in quietly, but her voice was soft when she asked, "You really came back for me?" Richard smiled gently, though his chest ached. "Of course I did. I told you I would." For the first time in a long while, Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile. It wasn't full, not yet, but it was a beginning. That night, Richard sat with her at dinner, pushing away his usual stack of documents. He listened as she talked about school projects, about how she wanted to try out for the choir, and how her friend Lily had a birthday coming up. Every detail mattered to him now. He asked questions, nodded and smiled, though inside he wrestled with guilt at realizing how much he had missed. But just as the warmth of the evening began to settle, a sharp knock echoed at the front door. Richard froze. He already knew who it might be. When he opened the door, Sarah, the woman from child welfare, stood there again, holding another folder. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Walker, I told you we would follow up." Richard's jaw tightened, but he stepped aside to let her in. Emily's face fell when she saw her, and she instinctively moved closer to her father. Sarah sat across from them at the dining table. She glanced at the untouched papers by Richard's seat, then at the meal on his plate. "It seems you've made some changes already. That's good," Richard said firmly. "I told you, I will do whatever it takes." Sarah studied him for a moment before turning her attention to Emily. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling? Do you think things are better?" Emily's eyes darted nervously to her father, then back to Sarah. She hesitated. Her voice was soft, uncertain. He came to school today. He stayed for dinner. It feels different." Sarah's expression softened slightly, but she pressed further. "Do you believe it will last?" Emily's gaze fell to the table. "I don't know. Sometimes Daddy makes promises and forgets them." The words stung Richard, but he didn't interrupt. He let the truth sit in the air. Sarah closed her folder. "I'll give you time, Mr. Walker. But understand this. If things slip again, the consequences will be serious." After she left, Emily looked at Richard nervously. "Are they really going to take me away?" Richard knelt down in front of her, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not if I can help it. But Emily, this isn't just about stopping them. This is about us, about me being the father you need, and I will prove it." For a moment, Emily just stared at him, then slowly reached out, touching his cheek with her small hand. "Then don't let me down again, Daddy." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of a demand, a plea, and a test all at once. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Richard walked through the empty halls of his mansion. Every corner reminded him of his success. But now, those same walls felt hollow. He paused at a family photo on the wall, him, Grace, and a younger Emily, smiling brightly. He touched the glass frame, his throat tightening. "I should have listened to you, Grace," he whispered. "You were right all along." Just then, his phone buzzed. He almost ignored it, but the name flashing on the screen caught his attention. Claire, his late wife's sister, the woman Emily had mentioned before. Richard answered cautiously. "Claire?" Her voice was sharp. "Richard, I heard child services came to your house. Emily told me. Do you know what this looks like?" His grip tightened on the phone. "I'm fixing it, Claire. I won't let anyone take her from me," Claire scoffed. "Fixing it? You've been saying that for years. Grace begged you to change, and you never did. Now Emily's suffering. Maybe she's better off with someone who won't let business come first." Richard's blood ran cold. "Are you suggesting—" Claire cut him off. "If you can't give Emily what she needs, I'll fight for custody myself. I won't let her grow up broken like this." The line went dead before Richard could respond. He stood frozen, his hand trembling around the phone. Another wave of fear crashed over him. Not only was child welfare watching, but now his own family was threatening to take Emily away. And as he stared at the darkened hallway, one thing became painfully clear. His battle had only just begun. The next few days felt heavier than anything Richard had ever experienced in his life. In the past, his biggest stress had been whether a deal would close or whether a board member might turn against him. But now, every moment carried a new kind of weight. The weight of proving to his daughter, to child welfare, and even to his late wife's sister that he could truly be a father. Each morning he woke early, preparing Emily's breakfast himself. The kitchen, once a place he rarely visited, was now filled with the aroma of scrambled eggs and toast. Emily would sit quietly at the table, watching him, as though trying to decide whether this sudden change was real or just another passing effort. One morning, as he slid a plate toward her, he tried to lighten the silence. "Your mom used to laugh at my cooking, you know. She said I could negotiate billion-dollar contracts but couldn't fry an egg properly." For the first time in weeks, Emily giggled softly. It was faint, but it was real. Richard's chest warmed at the sound. "Well," he said with a smile, "I guess I'm finally learning." But even as those moments gave him hope, the shadow of Claire's words lingered. Maybe she's better off with someone who won't let business come first. He couldn't shake the fear that she might actually try to fight for custody. Claire had always been outspoken, and since Grace's passing, she had often voiced her disapproval of how Richard managed his responsibilities as a father. One evening, as Emily worked on her homework at the dining table, Richard received an email that made his stomach twist. It was from his lawyer, subject line, "Custody Inquiry." His hand trembled as he opened it. Claire had officially reached out to explore custody options for Emily. His throat went dry. He looked over at his daughter, bent over her math book, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked so peaceful in that moment, unaware of the storm building around her. The thought of her being taken away, of her living without him, made his chest ache in a way he couldn't bear. He closed the laptop quickly before she could notice and forced a smile. "Need any help with those numbers?" Emily glanced up, a hint of suspicion in her eyes. "You usually don't like homework, Daddy," Richard chuckled softly. "Maybe I don't like it, but I like spending time with you. That makes it different." Her lips curved slightly, but she didn't press him further. Still, he could feel her watching him carefully, as if she was quietly testing whether his actions would match his promises. The next day, Sarah returned once again. This time, she didn't come alone. A man in a suit accompanied her, introducing himself as a court-appointed evaluator. Richard felt a surge of anger rise in his chest, but he kept it controlled. He couldn't afford to lose his temper now. They asked to see Emily's room, her daily routine, her interactions with her father. Richard tried to remain calm, but every question felt like an attack, like an accusation that he was unfit. Emily stayed close to him the whole time, her small hand clinging to his sleeve. When the evaluator asked, "Emily, do you feel safe here?" She looked at her father for a long moment before answering, "I feel safe when Daddy is with me." It was the kind of answer that both warmed Richard's heart and pierced it. Safe when he was there, but what about all the times he hadn't been? After they left, Richard sat on the edge of the couch, his head in his hands. Emily climbed beside him, resting her small head against his shoulder. "Are they going to take me, Daddy?" His voice cracked as he whispered, "Not if I can help it. I'll fight for you with everything I have." She lifted her head, her eyes shining with tears. "But fighting isn't enough. You have to stay." Her words echoed in his mind long into the night. A few days later, Richard made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He called his assistant and cancelled an international business trip that had been months in the making. Investors were furious, deals hung in limbo, but Richard didn't care. For the first time, his priorities were clear. When Emily overheard him on the phone saying, "Family comes first, business can wait," her eyes widened. She didn't say anything right away, but later, when they sat together watching a movie, she quietly leaned her head against his arm. That small gesture felt like the first real crack in the wall she had built around her heart. But just as progress seemed to be happening, another twist struck. One evening, Richard received a letter in the mail. Official papers. Claire had filed for temporary custody, citing emotional neglect and instability in the household. His hands shook as he read the words. It was no longer just a threat. It was real. That night he sat in his study, staring at the papers, his mind spinning. Emily knocked softly on the door. "Daddy." He quickly hid the papers under a stack of folders and forced a smile. "Come in, sweetheart." She walked in, holding a small drawing in her hands. "I made this for you." He took it gently, his throat tightening. It was a picture of the two of them holding hands with the words "Don't leave me" written in shaky letters at the top. Richard swallowed hard, pulling her into his arms. "I'm not leaving Emily, I promise." But as he held her, his mind raced. How could he protect her from a system that seemed ready to take her away? How could he fight his own sister-in-law, who believed she was doing the right thing? And worst of all, how could he erase the damage he himself had caused over the years? The next morning, when Sarah arrived unexpectedly, Richard finally confessed the truth. Her aunt is trying to take her. She filed for custody. Sarah studied him carefully. "Then this isn't just about you proving you can change. This is about showing the court beyond any doubt that Emily is better off with you. And Richard, you can't fake that. Emily's trust has to be real. Otherwise, they'll see right through you." Richard nodded, determination flickering in his eyes. "Then I'll earn her trust back, no matter how long it takes." But deep inside, fear still clawed at him, because he knew Claire wasn't just another opponent in business. She was family, and she knew his darkest flaws, the ones even Emily hadn't yet uncovered. And somewhere in the shadows of his memory, Richard couldn't shake one haunting thought: what if Claire wasn't entirely wrong? The courthouse stood tall and cold, its stone pillars rising like silent judges before Richard's anxious eyes. For a man who once walked confidently into boardrooms with hundreds of millions at stake, his hands had never trembled like they did that morning. He clutched Emily's tiny hand as they entered the building, her backpack bouncing gently against her shoulders. She tried to appear brave, but Richard could feel her grip tighten with every step they took. Inside, the waiting area buzzed with whispers, papers shuffling, and the occasional cough echoing against the walls. Richard spotted Claire across the hall. She wore a dark navy suit, her hair tied tightly in a bun, her posture straight as if she had already won. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked onto Richard's for only a moment before shifting toward Emily. The softness in her gaze when she looked at the little girl sent a shiver down Richard's spine. Emily leaned closer to him and whispered, "Daddy, do I have to talk to the judge?" Richard bent down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Only if they ask you, sweetheart. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." She nodded slowly, though her lips trembled. When the hearing began, the judge's gavel struck the desk, commanding silence. Richard sat with his lawyer, his heart pounding as Claire's attorney stood first. The man's voice was calm, but deliberate. Every word crafted to paint Richard as a father who had abandoned his child emotionally. He spoke of long business trips, of missed birthdays, of a little girl left in the care of nannies instead of her own father. Each sentence hit Richard like a blow, not because they were lies, but because they were the truth. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening, as Emily's eyes flickered between him and Claire. Then Claire herself stood, her voice trembling but clear. "Your Honor, I don't doubt that Richard loves Emily, but love is not enough. When a child feels abandoned, I promised my sister before she died that I would protect Emily if Richard couldn't. And right now, she needs more stability than he can provide." Richard wanted to stand up, to shout that she was wrong, that he had changed, but his lawyer's hand on his arm kept him seated. His turn would come. He had to wait. When his attorney finally spoke, the defense was strong. They argued that while Richard had made mistakes in the past, he was actively changing. They highlighted how he had cancelled business trips, how he was now present in Emily's daily life, how Emily herself had expressed safety and attachment when with her father. But then came the twist he hadn't expected. Claire's lawyer pulled out a series of documents, emails between Richard and his assistant, showing him complaining about how his schedule was being ruined by custody issues and how he needed to wrap this drama up fast. Richard's heart sank. He remembered those emails, sent in frustration before he realized how serious everything was becoming. Taken out of context, they made him look careless, even heartless. Emily's eyes widened as she looked up at him, confusion clouding her face. "Daddy, did you really say that?" she whispered, her voice so soft only he could hear. Richard's throat tightened. "I was angry, Emily. I didn't mean it, I swear, but the damage was done." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, the judge's expression unreadable as he glanced through the papers. Richard felt the walls closing in. During recess, Richard sat with Emily in a quiet corner. She refused to meet his eyes, staring instead at the floor. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "If you didn't mean it, why did you write it?" His chest ached. "Because I was stupid, Emily. I thought about work before I thought about us. But I promise you, that's over. You're the only thing that matters now." Tears welled in her eyes as she finally looked up. "I don't want to lose you, Daddy, but I don't want to feel like I'm second place again." Her words cut deeper than any argument in court could. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Never again. You'll never be second place. Not to anyone, not to anything." Back in the courtroom, the judge asked to hear from Emily directly. Richard's stomach twisted as she was called forward. She sat nervously in the chair, her small legs swinging above the floor. The judge leaned forward kindly. "Emily, do you love your father?" She nodded quickly. "Yes." "Do you love your aunt?" Another nod. "Yes." "Do you feel safe with both of them?" Emily hesitated this time. She looked at her father, then at Claire. Her voice cracked as she said, "I feel safe with Daddy, but sometimes he forgets about me. Aunt Claire never forgets." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard's chest tightened, every word from Emily striking like a knife. He wanted to scream that he would never forget again, that he would prove it until his last breath, but his voice caught in his throat. The judge nodded slowly, jotting down notes before excusing Emily. She ran back to her seat, her little hand clutching Richard's sleeve again, as if afraid she had betrayed him. He kissed the top of her head gently, whispering, "You did nothing wrong. You told the truth." But deep inside, he feared the truth might not be enough to save them. That night, back at the house, Richard sat alone in the dimly lit study. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch after a long, emotional day, her face still marked with dried tears. He stared at the custody papers, his lawyer's warnings echoing in his head. Claire's case was strong. If he didn't find a way to prove beyond doubt that Emily was happier and healthier with him, he could lose her. Suddenly, Richard remembered something Grace had once told him, years before she passed. They had argued about his constant business trips, and she had said, "One day, Richard, Emily won't care about your money. She'll only care if you were there when she needed you." Her words haunted him now, almost like a voice from the grave guiding him. He realized he couldn't win this fight with arguments or legal tricks. He had to win it with his actions, with proof that Emily's life was truly brighter with him in it. The next morning, Richard called his lawyer. "I want character witnesses, teachers, neighbors, anyone who's seen me with Emily these past months. I don't care if it's messy. I want the court to see the truth." The lawyer hesitated. That could backfire if they bring up the past. Richard's voice was steady, stronger than it had been in weeks. "Then let them bring it up. I won't run from my mistakes anymore. I'll face them." When he hung up, Emily shuffled sleepily into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, are you leaving again?" He lifted her into his arms, holding her close. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. We're going to fight this together." She wrapped her arms around his neck, her small voice muffled against his shoulder. "Promise?" His eyes burned with unshed tears as he whispered, "Promise." But in the back of his mind, he knew promises weren't enough. Not anymore. What mattered now was whether he could prove to Emily, to the court, and maybe even to himself, that he was worthy of being her father. And as the next court date approached, Richard felt a strange mix of dread and determination. He had faced ruthless competitors, hostile markets, and financial storms. But this battle for his daughter's heart was unlike anything he had ever fought before. And somewhere in the shadows of his doubts, one terrifying thought lingered. What if love alone wouldn't be enough to win? The courtroom was packed the morning of the second hearing. The air felt heavier, as though everyone inside already sensed that today would decide far more than just legal custody. It would determine the future of a little girl's heart. Richard adjusted his tie, his palms slick with sweat despite the cold air conditioning. Emily sat quietly beside him, her small hands clutching the edge of her dress, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces around her. She didn't say much, but the way she leaned against her father told everyone she was afraid of being pulled away from him. Claire sat on the opposite bench, her expression unreadable. Her lawyer busied himself with stacks of papers, but Claire's eyes stayed on Emily, filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. Richard could almost hear her thoughts. "I'm doing this for you, not against you." The judge entered, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. The first half of the day was spent reviewing documents, testimonies, and prior evidence. Richard's lawyer called Emily's schoolteacher, Mrs. Callahan, as their first witness. She spoke warmly of Emily's improvement in recent weeks, how she seemed happier, more engaged, and how Richard had started attending parent meetings regularly. "In my opinion," Mrs. Callahan said, her voice steady, "Emily thrives when her father is present. The change in her behavior these past weeks has been remarkable." Richard allowed himself a small sigh of relief, but it didn't last long. When it was Claire's lawyer's turn, he rose with a calm but cutting tone. "Mrs. Callahan, would you agree that a child's stability is determined not only by short-term improvements, but by consistent long-term presence?" She hesitated. "Yes, of course. And would you also agree that a child who has experienced long periods of emotional absence from a parent may struggle to fully trust that parent again?" Richard clenched his fists. Mrs. Callahan's reluctant nod felt like another crack, forming in his fragile defense. Then came the most unexpected twist of the day. Claire herself took the stand. She didn't come with accusations or anger. Instead, she told a story. "When Grace was still alive," Claire began, her voice trembling, "she called me one night in tears. She said Emily had fallen asleep waiting for Richard to come home, clutching her stuffed bear by the window. Grace told me she feared that one day Emily would stop waiting, that she would stop believing her father would come back. Those were my sister's words. I promised her before she passed that I would make sure Emily never felt abandoned. That's why I'm here today." The courtroom was silent, her words echoing in every corner. Richard felt his chest tighten, guilt crashing over him like a tidal wave. He remembered that night vividly, the deal in Chicago, the delayed flight, the phone call he never answered from Grace. He had thought it was just another night. To his wife and daughter, it had been so much more. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she whispered to him, "Is that true, Daddy?" Richard swallowed hard. "Yes, sweetheart, but I swear to you, I'll never make you wait like that again." The judge tapped his gavel lightly, breaking the silence. "We'll take a short recess." During the break, Richard led Emily to the hallway. She sat on a wooden bench, her legs swinging nervously. "Daddy," she said softly, "if Aunt Claire really promised Mummy, does that mean I should go with her?" Her words pierced him deeper than any legal argument. He knelt in front of her, his voice breaking. "Emily, your mommy wanted you to be safe and loved. That's all she ever wanted, and I swear no one will love you more than I do. Aunt Claire means well, but you're my little girl. You belong with me." Emily blinked up at him, torn between loyalty to her father and the weight of her mother's memory. Back inside, the atmosphere grew even more tense. Richard's lawyer decided to take a risk and call Richard himself to the stand. He rose slowly, his body heavy with the burden of his past. When asked to speak about his parenting, he didn't dodge or deflect. Instead, he told the truth. "I was absent," he admitted. "I missed birthdays, I missed bedtime stories. I thought providing money was the same as providing love. I was wrong. I failed my daughter in ways I'll never be able to erase. But these past months, I've changed. I canceled deals worth millions because I finally understood. Emily is worth more than any empire I could ever build. I'm not perfect, but I will never walk away from her again." The courtroom was silent. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded slightly. Claire's expression softened, though she didn't look away. Then, just as it seemed Richard's words might have turned the tide, Claire's lawyer struck again. He brought out a witness no one expected. One of Richard's former business partners. The man testified that Richard had once skipped an entire week of family events to close a deal overseas, joking at a dinner meeting that "kids don't remember this stuff anyway." Gasps filled the room. Richard's heart sank. He wanted to argue, to deny, but he remembered saying those very words years ago, careless, arrogant, believing his wealth excused everything. Emily looked at him with wide, hurt eyes. "You said that?" Richard closed his eyes briefly, then met her gaze. "Yes, I said it, and I regret it every single day. But I'm not that man anymore, Emily. I'm not." The judge finally called for the day's session to end, announcing that closing arguments would happen the next morning. Richard walked out of the courthouse with Emily's hand in his, the press shouting questions in the background. But all he could hear was his daughter's quiet voice beside him. "Daddy, what if the judge thinks Aunt Claire is better?" He stopped walking, kneeling on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned closer, but he didn't care. He cupped her face gently. "Then I'll fight again, Emily. I'll never stop fighting for you, because you're my little girl, and no judge, no lawyer, no mistake I've made will ever change that." She threw her arms around him, her small body trembling. "I just want us to stay together." His eyes burned as he whispered back, "We will, sweetheart, we will." But deep inside, he knew nothing was guaranteed. The final decision loomed ahead, and one more devastating twist waited to test them both, something even Richard didn't see coming. The final morning arrived like a storm. Richard could not escape. The courthouse seemed colder, the walls taller, and the silence heavier than before. He sat beside Emily, his hands trembling despite the calm face he tried to wear. She leaned against him, her small voice whispering, "Daddy, will the judge tell me to leave you today?" His throat tightened. He kissed her forehead softly. "No matter what anyone says, Emily, you'll always be mine. Nothing can change that." The judge entered, and the entire room rose. The air carried a tension so thick that even the clicking of a pen sounded like thunder. Both lawyers gave their closing arguments, repeating evidence, twisting words, and pleading for their side. Claire's lawyer ended with a heavy blow. "Your Honor, Emily deserves consistency. She deserves someone who won't let her be forgotten. Again, her aunt can give her that. Her father has proven time and time again that he cannot." Richard's lawyer responded passionately, "Yes, mistakes were made, but redemption is real. This man has turned his life upside down to become the father his daughter needs. And Emily herself has said she feels safe with her father. Isn't that what matters most?" The judge leaned back, silent, his eyes scanning the room before finally speaking. "Before I make a decision, I'd like to hear from Emily one last time." Gasps filled the courtroom. Emily's eyes widened as the judge motioned her forward. She hesitated, clinging to Richard's hand. He squeezed it gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just be honest." Emily walked slowly to the chair. Her voice was soft, but the silence made every word echo. "I love my daddy. I know he was gone a lot before, but he's here now. He cooks breakfast, he helps me with homework, he even burned pancakes once, but still ate them so I wouldn't feel bad." The courtroom chuckled softly, but her eyes grew serious again. "Aunt Claire loves me too. She never forgets me, but..." She paused, looking at Richard. Tears pooled in her eyes. "I don't want to lose my daddy. I don't care if he made mistakes. I just want to stay with him. Please." The room fell silent again. Claire wiped her eyes, her tough exterior cracking. She looked down at her lap, as though questioning her own fight. The judge cleared his throat. "Thank you, Emily. That was very brave." But before the judge could continue, Claire suddenly stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something." The entire courtroom turned to her. Richard stiffened, unsure of what she would do. Claire's voice trembled as she spoke. "I came here because I promised my sister I'd protect Emily. I thought the only way to do that was to take her away from Richard. But hearing Emily, seeing how she clings to her father, I realize maybe protection doesn't always mean separation." She turned toward Richard, her eyes soft for the first time. "I don't want to destroy you, Richard. I just want Emily to be loved." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting you wish to withdraw your custody petition?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "On one condition, that Richard allows me to remain a part of Emily's daily life, not as a replacement parent, but as an aunt who promised. Her mother, she'd always be there." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Richard sat frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. For weeks, he had prepared for a battle, but instead his opponent had offered something different. Not victory, not defeat, but a chance for healing. He stood slowly, his voice breaking. "If that's what it takes to give Emily the love she deserves, then yes, I'll agree." The judge looked at both of them, then down at Emily, who now smiled faintly through her tears. "In that case, I see no reason to proceed further. Custody will remain with the father, with visitation rights for the aunt. This court is adjourned." The gavel struck, but it sounded less like an end and more like a new beginning. Richard knelt as Emily ran into his arms, sobbing into his chest. "We did it, Daddy. We can stay together." His own tears finally fell. "Yes, sweetheart, we can, and I promise I'll never make you doubt me again." Claire approached slowly, her eyes glistening. She placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "I'll still be here too, sweet girl, just like I promised your mommy." Emily looked between them, then hugged Claire tightly before turning back to her father. For the first time in years, Richard felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not the emptiness of guilt, not the sharp sting of regret, but peace. Moral lesson: money, success, and power can never replace presence, love, and time. Children don't. Remember the contracts you signed or the deals you closed. They remember the nights you held them when they cried, the mornings you made their breakfast, and the moments you showed up when they needed you most. A father's true wealth is not measured in millions. It's measured in the trust, love, and laughter of his child.